I'm 77 years old, and I keep catching myself listening for the sound of my own front door opening, like someone might still come home. It's a quiet house now. Too quiet for a man who once said he was doing everything for the family. I'm not telling this because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I don't even think pity fits, not really. This is something else. This is me finally saying out loud what I spent a lifetime dressing up in better words. I made a mistake with my children. Not the kind you can apologize for once and fix with a weekend trip and a promise to do better. The kind that becomes the shape of the whole relationship. The kind you don't notice until you're old enough to understand what you traded away. I have pictures of them, school portraits, birthdays, a couple of awkward family vacations where the sun is too bright and everyone looks like they're squinting through discomfort. If I'm honest, those pictures are proof I was there sometimes. They're not proof I was present. These days I wake up early because I can't sleep in anymore. The body stops letting you bargain with it. My knees complain, my back complains, and I shuffle into the kitchen in my socks and make coffee that tastes like the same coffee I've been making for decades. I stand by the sink and look out at the backyard. The grass still grows. The fence still needs paint. Life keeps asking to be maintained. But there's no one in the house to hear me clear my throat. No one to call out, "Dad," from the hallway. My wife, God rest her, has been gone 4 years now. Cancer. Not dramatic, not cinematic. It was paperwork and pill bottles and trying to eat a little something. It was me sitting in a chair beside her bed with the TV low, watching her sleep and feeling like a stranger in my own life, because when she finally needed me, I realized I didn't have practice being there. After she died, the quiet got louder. People say grief comes in waves. For me it was more like fog. It settled in the corners of the rooms and didn't lift. And in that fog, the thoughts that had been waiting for years started walking around like they owned the place. You get old, and time changes. It stops feeling like a long road and starts feeling like a short hallway. You can see the end of it, even if you don't talk about it. I don't know how much longer I have. Maybe 10 years, maybe 5, maybe 2. The doctor doesn't make promises. Neither do I. So I'm telling you what I did, and how I did it so slowly that I could pretend it wasn't happening. When my kids were small, I worked all the time. I don't mean that as a badge. I mean it as a fact I hid behind. I was a decent man in the way people used to mean it. I didn't drink much. I didn't hit. I didn't run around. I paid the bills. I kept the lights on. I fixed the leaky faucet. I made sure the car had gas. I thought that was love. My father was not affectionate. He was a hard man, and the world had made him that way. He worked with his hands, and when he came home, he sat down like he'd been folded in half all day and just wanted to be quiet. My mother moved around him like he was something fragile and explosive at the same time. So when I became a father, I promised myself I'd be better. Not softer, exactly. Just better. And I believed the way to be better was to provide what I never had. Stability. A house. New shoes when the old ones got holes. A Christmas morning where the kids didn't have to pretend not to want anything. The problem is, providing became my excuse for everything else. I married my wife young. She was 22. I was 24. We weren't kids, but we weren't fully grown either. We got a little starter house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that always smelled like toast and dish soap. We made do. When our first child was born, I remember holding him and feeling terrified. Not of him. Of failing. I looked at that tiny face and thought, I am responsible for you. And the weight of that responsibility didn't make me tender. It made me tense. I threw myself into work the way some men throw themselves into the bottle. I told myself I didn't have a choice. The truth is, I like being needed at work. I like being the guy who could stay late, the guy who could solve problems. The guy the boss nodded at. At home, the problems were different. A crying baby at 2 a.m. doesn't care about your competence. A toddler having a tantrum doesn't care that you got promoted. You can't win at home the way you can win at work. And I wanted to win. So I stayed late. Not every night, but enough. I took overtime. I said yes to the Saturday shift. I took calls on the porch while the kids played inside. I would walk in the door and they'd run up to me, and I'd scoop them up with one arm while my other hand reached for the mail, or my eyes went to the clock, calculating dinner, calculating sleep. I was physically there, but I was always halfway gone. My wife tried it first. She'd say, "They missed you today." Not accusing. Just stating it. She'd tell me what they did, what they said, what made them laugh. Sometimes I listened. Sometimes I nodded like someone listening to the weather report. The kids learned quickly what kind of attention I had to give. Short. Limited. Like a phone battery at 12%. If they wanted to show me a drawing, they had to catch me at the right moment. If they wanted to tell me a story, they had to keep it quick. If they wanted me to play, they had to accept that I'd glance at my watch every few minutes. I didn't see it then. I thought I was just tired. I thought it was normal. You want to know the honest part? There were evenings when I sat in my car in the driveway for a few extra minutes before going inside. Not because I didn't love them. Because inside meant noise and needs and emotion. Inside meant I had to shift into a role I didn't feel good at. In the car, it was quiet. In the car, I could just be. That's not something I'm proud of. It's something I finally admit. As the kids got older, the gap didn't close. It widened. In their teenage years, they didn't chase me anymore. They stopped running to the door. They stopped asking if I'd play. They stopped trying to wedge themselves into the little sliver of space I left for them. They built their lives around my absence, and I mistook that for independence. I remember my daughter, she must have been about 14, standing in the kitchen while I ate dinner. She was holding a permission slip for a school trip. It was a simple thing. A signature. She waited while I chewed and watched the news. She said, "Dad, can you sign this?" And I said, without looking up, "In a minute." I meant it. I really did. I wasn't trying to dismiss her. But then the segment changed on TV, and I wanted to hear it. And then I remembered something about a bill. And then my phone rang. And when I finally looked up, she wasn't there anymore. The permission slip was on the table. She'd left it. She'd stopped waiting. That's what happened in our family. People stopped waiting for me. My son played baseball. Not professionally, not anything special. Just little league and then high school. I went to some games. I did. But I missed others, and the ones I attended, I often arrived late, still wearing my work shirt, smelling like machinery and sweat. I would find a spot in the bleachers and wave. He'd glance up and give a little nod like, "Okay. You're here." I told myself it was better than nothing. It wasn't. Because better than nothing is what you say when you're negotiating with your conscience. My wife carried the real weight. The dentist appointments. The parent-teacher meetings. The sick days. The homework. The talks about friends and heartbreak and growing up. She tried to include me. She'd sit next to me on the couch at night and say, "He's been quieter lately," or "She's not sleeping well," and I'd grunt and say, "Teenagers," as if naming it solved it. There were moments she got angry. Real anger. Not nagging. Not complaining. She'd say, "I need you here." And I'd say, "I am here." That sentence. I can still hear it coming out of my mouth. Like a lie you believe because it's convenient. Then there was the day my son graduated high school. I was there. In the crowd. Clapping. I remember the sun on my neck. I remember my wife's hand gripping mine. I remember my son's name being called and him walking across that stage. Afterwards, everyone stood around taking pictures. My son posed with friends. My daughter stood with a group of girls, laughing. And I looked at them and realized I didn't know who their friends were. Not really. I knew names. I didn't know the people. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know what my kids were like when they weren't around me. I had raised strangers. I didn't say that out loud. I swallowed it and took a picture and said, "Proud of you," and patted my son on the shoulder like he was a coworker. Then he moved out. College. New city. New life. We did the calls. Holiday visits. The usual. But the thing about a relationship built on later is that later doesn't automatically become now. Later becomes a habit. And habits don't change just because you want them to. In my 50s, I started to slow down at work. Not because I wanted to be home more, but because my body started making decisions for me. I had back pain. I had high blood pressure. I had a doctor look at me with that calm face and say, "You need to reduce stress." So I did what I'd always done. I listened to authority. I cut back hours. I started coming home earlier. But by then, the kids were gone. The house was quieter for a different reason. My wife and I would eat dinner across from each other, and she'd talk about things she'd been carrying alone for years. Little resentments. Little lonelinesses. And I would feel defensive, because I wanted credit for showing up now. I wanted her to say, "Thank you for finally being here." She didn't. Because she'd needed me when the children were small, when the days were long, when she felt invisible. She'd needed me when she was tired in her bones and still had to pack lunches and fold laundry and be patient. And I was somewhere else, chasing something I thought was necessary. I don't blame my wife for being cold sometimes. I understand it now. Her warmth had been spent. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes from sitting next to someone who knows you, but doesn't feel known by you. I lived in a house full of that. The turning point didn't come with fireworks. It came with a phone call. My daughter called me one afternoon. She was in her early 30s. Married. Had a child of her own. A little boy I'd met, but not enough. Her voice was tight. She said, "Mom's been forgetting things." I said, "Like what?" She told me small things at first. Repeating stories. Misplacing keys. Leaving the stove on. Getting confused in the grocery store. I told myself it was age. Stress. Menopause. Anything but what it was. Then my wife started losing words. Not all at once. Just here and there. She'd pause mid-sentence and look at me like the next word had slipped behind the couch. And when I saw fear in her eyes, real fear, something inside me shifted. I tried to step up. I did. I went to appointments. I kept track of medications. I learned how to fill out forms and talk to nurses. I thought I was finally doing my job. But it wasn't the same job. It wasn't building a life. It was managing the end of one. My wife was diagnosed with cancer not long after we started noticing the memory problems. The doctors weren't sure if the fog in her mind was related to stress or something else, but once the cancer was there, everything else became background noise. The treatments were hard on her. She lost weight. Lost hair. Lost patience. Lost herself in small pieces. At night, I would sit in the dark living room while she slept and think about all the nights I'd sat in the dark living room in my younger years, telling myself I deserved rest after work. I realized I had been resting my whole life. Not physically. Emotionally. I had been saving myself, like love was something you had to conserve. When she got close to the end, she became very quiet. Not angry. Just distant, like she was already halfway gone. One night, she looked at me and said, "You were always busy." That's all she said. Not "you ruined my life." Not "I hate you." Nothing dramatic. Just that sentence. And I couldn't defend myself against it because it was true. I leaned forward and said, "I'm sorry." She nodded, like someone hearing a piece of news they already knew. Then she closed her eyes. She died a few weeks later. After the funeral, the kids stayed a couple days. We ate leftovers. We went through paperwork. We talked about selling her car. The ordinary logistics that arrive after someone leaves. My son sat with me on the porch one evening. He was a man by then. He had his own lines around his eyes. His own tiredness. We sat in silence, and I thought, this is my chance. Say something real. Don't waste it. So I said, I know I wasn't around like I should have been. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry either. He just looked settled. He said, "Yeah." That "yeah" was heavier than any shouting. Then he said, "You did what you did. Not cruel. Not forgiving. Just factual." We sat there until the sun went down. And when he left, I realized how little time we'd spent alone together in his entire childhood. Just the two of us. Not errands. Not chores. Not work-related projects. Just being together. I couldn't remember many. That's what can't be fixed. You can't go back and sit on the floor with your 5-year-old and build the tower they asked you to build. You can't go back and listen to a 10-year-old explain a dream they had without glancing at your watch. You can't go back and ask your teenager how their day really was, and mean it, and have them believe you. You can't go back and make your wife feel like she wasn't doing it alone. People think regret is this loud thing. Crying. Screaming. Falling apart. Sometimes it's just a man in an empty kitchen, looking at a calendar with no one's birthday circled on it because no one's coming. My children still call. Sometimes. Holidays. A few scattered Sundays. The calls are polite. Not cold, just careful. Like they're talking to someone they don't want to upset. They'll say, "How are you doing, Dad?" And I'll say, "I'm alright." And they'll tell me about work, about the kids, about the weather where they live. I'll laugh at the right moments. I'll ask questions. But I can hear the distance. It's in what they don't tell me. It's in how the calls end. When they hang up, I sit with the phone in my hand for a second longer than I need to, like holding it might keep them closer. I think about the word love. I used to believe love was responsibility. That if I took care of the practical things, the rest would take care of itself. I was wrong. Responsibility without presence is just management. It keeps people alive, but it doesn't make them feel held. I see it now when I watch my grandson with my son. My son gets on the floor with him. He listens. He lets the kid talk about nothing for 10 minutes like it's the most important thing in the world. Sometimes I feel proud. Sometimes I feel a kind of grief that's hard to name. Because he learned that somewhere. Maybe from seeing what he didn't want to repeat. I don't want to paint myself as a villain. I wasn't. I loved my family. I did. But love isn't just what you feel. It's what people experience from you. And my kids experienced a man who was always on his way to something else. If you're listening to this and you still have young children, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not qualified to give instructions. I'm just an old man with a story. But I will tell you what I wish I'd understood when I was 35 and convinced I had time. There is a kind of closeness you only get when you show up for the boring parts. The school nights. The long car rides. The bedtime routines. The mornings when nobody's in a good mood. The afternoons when they want to tell you something that doesn't seem important, but it is, because it's them handing you their world. I thought big moments mattered most. Graduation. Christmas. The family vacation. The truth is, the big moments are just punctuation. The sentences are the days in between. And if you're not there for the sentences, the punctuation doesn't make sense. I also wish I'd known that work will always take what you give it. Always. There's no finish line where it turns around and thanks you and hands you your family back the way they were. Work ends when you stop. Life keeps moving. And children don't wait forever. They adapt. They stop reaching. They stop asking. They stop trying. Not because they don't love you, but because they need to live. Sometimes people say, at least you provided. Yes. I did. And I would trade a good portion of what I provided for one ordinary week back. 1 week where my wife isn't tired in her eyes. 1 week where my daughter is still leaving permission slips on the table. 1 week where my son still believes I'll show up. I can't have that. What I have now is a quiet house and a shelf of photographs and a mind that replays the same small moments, the ones I used to rush through. I still see that permission slip on the table. I still see my son glance up at the bleachers. I still hear my wife say, "I need you here." And I still hear myself answer, "I am here." If this meant something to you, if you're sitting there thinking about your own life, maybe you could leave a comment. Not for the algorithm. Just so I know I'm not the only one who's carried something like this quietly. But even if you don't, that's alright. I'm not looking for a crowd. I'm just talking into the dark a little, the way you do when you're old and you realize the truth doesn't need an audience to be real. The rest of my life will be smaller than the first part. That's just how it goes. I can still make coffee in the morning. I can still stand at the sink and watch the yard. I can still pick up the phone and call my children, even if I'm not sure what to say sometimes. Sometimes I do call. Sometimes it goes to voicemail, and I hang up without leaving a message, because I don't want to be a burden. That's another habit I built, staying quiet, staying contained. But every once in a while, one of them answers, and I hear their voice, and for a moment I'm back in that old house with the small kitchen and the smell of toast. And I think, here I am. Not as I should have been. Not as I wanted to be. Just here. At 77, that's all I can offer now. Presence, late. And the truth, finally said out loud.